On August 17, 2006, patrons at a nightclub in Uruapan, Michoacán, ran for their lives after masked men stormed in. Within minutes, 5 severed heads were dumped onto the dance floor. Next to them, a banner, La Familia doesn't kill for money, only those who deserve to die. The message wasn't for the victims, it was for the nation. A declaration that a new order was rising, and it no longer feared the state. This was Mexico in 2006. And within months, the government would respond with its own message by declaring war. For decades, drug cartels in Mexico had operated in the shadows. They trafficked heroin, marijuana, cocaine, and later meth. Their routes ran north, straight into the United States, the world's largest drug market. But by the early 2000s, cartels were no longer just smuggling drugs. They were running towns, assassinating police, extorting businesses, bribing politicians. Entire regions like Sinaloa, Tamaulipas, Guerrero, and Michoacán were no longer under full state control. Mayors were on payrolls. Judges were bought. Police departments answered to kingpins. Mexico hadn't lost a war. It had slowly surrendered from the inside. Presidents before Calderón had known. The intelligence was there. The corruption was visible. But acting against the cartels carried risks. When President Ernesto Zedillo tried limited crackdowns in the 90s, high-ranking politicians were assassinated. When President Vicente Fox took office in 2000, he promised reform, but did little. Local governments were infiltrated. Federal prosecutors were targeted. No one wanted a war. Instead, many politicians took the safer path: silence, negotiation, or complicity. By 2006, that approach had failed. The cartels were no longer hiding. Groups like the Gulf Cartel, Sinaloa Cartel, and La Familia Michoacana had militarized. Their gunmen wore tactical gear, carried assault rifles, and moved in convoys. They enforced order in rural towns, executing thieves, collecting taxes, and sometimes building schools or churches. But their justice was brutal. Bodies were hung from bridges. Rivals were tortured. Civilians disappeared. Some regions, like Tamaulipas and Guerrero, were narco-states in all but name. At the center of Michoacán's collapse was an organization unlike any other in Mexico. It called itself La Familia Michoacana. To outsiders, it looked like a drug cartel. But inside, it operated like a cult. Founded in the early 2000s, La Familia was led by a man named Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, known simply as El Mas Loco, the craziest one. Moreno wasn't just a trafficker. He was a self-proclaimed spiritual guide. In Michoacán's villages, La Familia presented itself as a moral police. They executed criminals who harmed the community, prohibited kidnapping and extortion unless ordered by leadership, and built schools and churches while running massive methamphetamine labs in the surrounding forests. But their justice was savage. They were responsible for dismemberments, beheadings, and public terror displays. They trained recruits in hidden camps, bribed local police, and declared themselves servants of God, tasked with cleansing society while shipping meth into the United States. By 2006, La Familia had become more than just a cartel. It was an insurgent force, controlling territory, enforcing law, and defying the state with righteous fury. For President Calderón, who grew up in Michoacán, this was personal. His home state had been overtaken by killers who wrapped themselves in religion. And now, they were daring the government to challenge them. On December 1, 2006, Felipe Calderón took office under a cloud of controversy. His victory had been razor-thin. Protests rocked the streets. Half the country questioned his legitimacy. But something even more urgent was collapsing: the rule of law. Entire regions were under cartel control. Police chiefs were being executed. Small towns were governed by fear. And Calderón's home state, Michoacán, had become a national symbol of that decay. For Calderón, doing nothing meant allowing Mexico to slide further into chaos. But there was another reason. He needed to show power, fast. Launching a military offensive allowed him to assert federal authority, challenge cartel dominance, and reinforce his presidency amid doubts about his mandate. Just days into office, he signed off on Operativo Conjunto Michoacán, a military-led security crackdown that would mark the start of Mexico's drug war. It was the boldest move by a Mexican president in decades. and it would change the country forever. The first boots hit the ground in Michoacán, Calderón's home state and cartel stronghold. 6,500 troops from the Army, Navy, and Federal Preventive Police entered the region under joint command. It was more than just patrols. This was an organized military operation. They established forward operating bases in strategic towns like Apatzingán, Uruapan, and Lázaro Cárdenas, areas dominated by La Familia Michoacana. Roads were blocked, vehicles were searched. Entire neighborhoods were locked down. Night raids targeted suspected cartel safe houses. Cocaine labs were dismantled and weapon stockpiles, including assault rifles, grenades, and body armor, were seized. But the Army's role wasn't limited to combat. It took over basic policing duties, patrolling streets, conducting arrests, providing security to prosecutors and judges, and even running intelligence operations. In some regions, the Army replaced local police entirely, not because it wanted to, but because it had to. Many municipal forces were corrupt, underpaid, or working for the very cartels they were supposed to fight. Civilians were stunned. Many had never seen the military in their towns, at least not like this. To some, the soldiers were protectors. To others, they were invaders. But one thing was clear: the era of ignoring the cartels was over. The Army's arrival wasn't quiet. They may not have stormed cartel compounds immediately, but they did something just as dangerous. They disrupted the business. Federal forces began seizing drug shipments, arresting mid-level operatives, dismantling meth labs, and reclaiming towns under cartel influence. They took away the roads, the safe houses, and the silence the cartels had once relied on. And the cartels, especially La Familia Michoacana and the Gulf Cartel, responded the only way they knew how: with blood. By January 2007, just 1 month after the Michoacán deployment, the first wave of assassinations began. Police chiefs, judges, and military-linked officials were killed one by one. Arturo Tapia, police commander in Lázaro Cárdenas, was shot dead in his patrol car. In Nuevo León, cartel gunmen executed 5 municipal officers in a coordinated ambush. A prosecutor in Guerrero was gunned down outside his office. In Acapulco, the decapitated heads of 2 federal officers were left outside a government building. In many cases, narcomantas, cartel warning banners, were left behind, boldly taunting the authorities. Messages read, "You took one of ours. Now we take 5, leave Michoacán or more will fall." By the end of 2007, over 500 police officers and officials would be assassinated across Mexico. These weren't random killings. They were strategic. Cartels wanted to intimidate local governments, punish collaboration with the military, and deter any future resistance. In some states, no one wanted to be police chief. The job had become a death sentence. And the worst was yet to come. The cartel message was clear: you bring the war, we bring the blood. But the military wasn't backing down. In early 2007, following the wave of assassinations, the Mexican Army launched targeted counterstrikes across Michoacán. The goal: cripple La Familia's operations, not just the gunmen, but their production lines, their cash flows, and their territory. In coordinated offensives with federal police and intelligence units, over 50 meth labs were located and destroyed in the first quarter alone. More than 500 cartel suspects were arrested, including mid-level commanders and logistics operators. In Zamora and Uruapan, raids uncovered hidden arsenals, AK-47s, fragmentation grenades, .50 caliber sniper rifles, and body armor. One of the biggest breakthroughs came in March 2007 when Army commandos stormed a remote compound near Apatzingán. Inside, they captured Arnaldo Rueda Medina, alias La Minsa, a high-ranking logistics chief for La Familia. His arrest triggered a wave of retaliatory attacks across multiple cities, showing just how central he was to cartel operations. But it also exposed the cartel's weakness. When key nodes were taken out, their operations fractured. The military had no illusions of wiping them out overnight, but they were now delivering real blows, not symbolic gestures. And for the first time in years, the state was pushing back with force. The Army's early victories sent a message: the government was no longer passive. But the cartels responded with escalation. What began as a confrontation in Michoacán now spread to Nuevo León, Guerrero, Tamaulipas, and Chihuahua. The violence was no longer one-sided. Cartels began acting like insurgent groups, using convoys of armored trucks, coordinating attacks on military bases, and even deploying military-style ambushes using radios and lookouts. In Acapulco, cartel gunmen attacked soldiers with grenades. In Tamaulipas, a convoy of vehicles ambushed federal police, leaving several dead. In Nuevo Laredo, dozens of bodies began appearing in streets, not just rivals, but civilians accused of cooperating with the military. The number of cartel-linked killings exploded from 2,119 deaths in 2006 to over 3,000 in 2007, and more than 5,000 by 2008. This wasn't just retaliation, it was open warfare. And new players entered the battlefield: the Gulf Cartel, its elite armed wing, Los Zetas, and rival organizations like the Sinaloa Cartel, which used the chaos to expand its power. What began as a crackdown in one state had now become a national conflict. By the close of 2006, the war was no longer a policy, it was a lived reality. Over 2,000 people were dead. Thousands more had fled their homes. And the military, once seen as the last untouchable institution, was now entrenched in daily combat. President Calderón had launched a war that no previous administration dared begin. And once it started, it couldn't be undone. The cartels had proven they would not surrender. The army had shown it would no longer look away. But there was no roadmap, no defined victory, no exit plan. What began in Michoacán would soon engulf the entire nation, dragging new cartels, cities, and innocent civilians into the fire. And for Mexico, 2006 was just the first chapter. But Mexico wasn't fighting alone. As cartel violence exploded, the United States quietly stepped in behind the scenes, funding, training, and equipping Mexico's federal forces through what would soon become the Mérida Initiative. Billions of dollars, advanced surveillance tools, and cross-border intelligence would begin flowing south. At the same time, American guns flowed in the opposite direction, arming the very cartels Mexico was trying to destroy. This growing U.S. role and its unintended consequences would become a crucial part of the war's next chapter. We'll explore that in a future episode. The government had fired the first shot, but the war was just beginning. Across the borderlands and highways, in prisons and jungles, new enemies were gathering strength, enemies trained by the state itself. Watch our next episode to uncover the rise of Los Zetas, from soldiers to cartel monsters.